Okay. Next, we have learnings and challenges of enabling passkeys in a diverse workforce environment. We have Johannes and Hans from Okta. Please welcome them.
Yep, thank you. So yeah, we'll get started right away. Lots of stuff to cover. So we want to kind of review the last 1 year of passkeys, specifically in enterprise environments, so more from the relying party viewpoint. And then Hans will dive a little deeper into what you have to consider when you adopt passkeys. Really quick, some legal stuff. I wasn't sure if I should leave it in there. We'll not talk about products or roadmaps from us, but there's some data that we got out of our service, and in general shouldn't use that directly as security or legal advice, what we're giving here. Now, let's start with introducing ourselves. Hans?
Hey, my name's Hans Reichenbach. I'm a software architect at Okta. I work on our FastPass and Zero Trust solutions.
Yeah, and mine looks very similar. So on the workforce side, working on the enterprise authenticator, and then in FIDO, specifically for how to enable passkey providers in the enterprise. Now, quick look at the agenda. I'll be really quick with the first topic, because you probably heard a lot already today. Then a little State of the Union, where we're at today in the enterprise with passkeys, and then, as I said, Hans will go into detail what to consider. So, why passkeys? You probably heard it today many times. They have very good security, so I'll not go into detail on that, because you probably heard it so many times, and if you don't believe it by now, it's probably pointless. And then user experience, that's one where I want to drill in a little bit, because we saw the stats today already, and it's very similar to what we're seeing. You have twice as fast onboarding and up to 4 times faster authentications, and I want to show a little bit what that means. So far, didn't really see it side by side, so what I want to show here is a quick demo. On the left side, or your left side, you'll see me trying to sign up and sign in with username and password, and on the right side, you'll see someone using a passkey. And just a quick comparison, so you can see I just started entering my password, while pretty much the sign up already succeeded with the passkey. Passwords are not that great. If it's a weak password, it's even worse. So there is the requirements for the passwords are pretty high. That's why it takes me forever to enter one. Double check now, and eventually I got in. I created my account. So you can see that's pretty much matching the twice as fast from the other stats. Now, what's really important is the authentication experience, right? You can see, okay, passkey is already done. I'm still typing my identifier. And in an enterprise environment, probably you can cache the identifier, but it would still be quite a bit slower. Again, because of all the requirements, it's hard to remember your password. Maybe I just had to reset it, so it takes forever. Again, not exactly fair comparison, but at the end it would only, you'll still considerably slower with a password. So if you look in detail, we have the stats. This is from our secure sign-in trends report. I'll not go into onboarding that much. Numbers match very well, but the interesting piece is really authentication. What I want to point out is you're doing that many times a day. In my case, I looked at our telemetry. I'm doing 2FA step out 30 times a day. And if you look in an enterprise, you're probably doing 2FA, maybe with legacy auth, you're using password and push. So you're using 15 seconds versus passkeys or WebAuth and or FIDO credentials, it takes 3 seconds. So I'm saving 12 seconds on every auth. If you sum that up, right, that's 6 minutes that I'm saving. But if you're a company with 1,000 people, that's actually 100 hours a day, right, that you're saving in productivity. But honestly, you're probably not saving that, because if you are wasting 100 hours when you're enabling that much step up, you can't enable it. So the real thing is the user experience that you're gaining really allows you to eventually step users up more frequently and get a better security posture. Now, with that, towards the State of the Union, where we are at today. So this is also from the Secure Sign-in Trends report. On the top right, that's pretty much putting security on the y-axis, the usability on the x-axis. You can see that FIDO2 credentials are on the top right. That's not surprising, and password obviously pretty low on the security score. But what's interesting is really, like we have 2 phishing-resistant authenticators on the top right, and that's only 4% in the workforce, and that data is from this year, earlier this year. One good thing is that companies are really trying to deploy, but we're still, probably today's numbers would be around 10%. So it's still too low. And then the ask is, why is that really? So if you're looking at the enterprise requirements, the first thing that comes to mind is they need consistency, right? If your ecosystem is changing rapidly, it's really hard for enterprises to actually adopt them because they have to document for their users internally what they should do to authenticate. The next one is also, it should work universally, right? It has to work on every platform, preferably the same. It has to work on every resource. And what's hard for enterprises is really the legacy workloads, right? How do I sign in in a phishing-resistant manner to my on-premise database, right? How do I do that on virtual machines? Another one that we're seeing is the corporate versus personal devices. Most companies cannot afford really to do all workloads on managed devices. So there has to be ways to do phishing-resistant authentication on personal devices to keep them productive, or they keep the users productive. And then the next one is obviously enterprises need control. And the first reaction to passkeys was, we don't like them. They sync everywhere. We have no control. I think enterprises came around more, but they still want to control when a key syncs, right? They want to know when a syncable key can be used and when a device-bound key is important for high assurance. Security, we already brought it up, but one that's interesting is FIDO pretty much gives you very high user assurance, user auth, very secure user auth, but to really have full context, you need also device context. And for that, today, mostly you get that through enterprise attestation, but it's not well understood and also not that well deployed. The last one is obviously, cost and scale are also important, right? If you want to go phishing resistant, you can't do that overnight by shipping everyone security keys, right? That is a financial burden on your company, right? So you have to do that over time. Yeah, I'll also go really quick here. Pretty much, Rachel already, I think she brought the exact same number. So breaches are expensive. Companies get breached all the time. Most of them twice or in the same year. But what I want to kind of point out is most of the breaches still involve some sort of credentials, and even more so, they have a human component, and that's really where FIDO can shine, or FIDO2 credentials, right? Because they're removing this user component to some extent. Like the security of a password relies tremendously on the user, right? Picking the right password, not reusing it. Same with fatigue attacks, right? Relies on the user to do the right thing. FIDO doesn't have the same problems. And then lastly, on my part, I want to talk about where you can get started today. Like the first one is infrastructure. You want to start or protecting your high asset or your assets, right? You should have 2FA for all your admin accounts already, but you really have to get towards phishing resistance for all your admins. You should do the same for all your critical resources, right? And then maybe you start with migration. You can introduce passkeys as an alternative to your legacy MFA and allow users to enroll them. You can gain learnings through that. And that can be used in the future to really enforce it. And you also want to maybe start with onboarding. Maybe it's not feasible to have everyone move to phishing resistance right away because of the burden of maybe deploying security keys, but you can start with new employees. And then gradually enable also phishing-resistant recovery methods, maybe for them or maybe for users that need the recovery at that point. And then really important, and that maps to all of those actually, is to not allow or like build a system that doesn't really allow MFA downgrade, right? That's where a lot of the social engineering attacks or what the social engineering attacks are targeting. They are pretty much tricking your user into disabling their 2FA. So if you have a workflow where the user themselves can remove all their phishing-resistant authenticators, that can be exploited. Yeah, and with that, I hand it to Hans.
Thanks, Johannes.
Thank you.
All right, so what should you keep in mind when you're adopting passkeys? There's kind of 3 big pieces, obviously. So there's registration, getting people in the door. Authentication, that's the day-to-day experience. and recovery, a situation that hopefully is a minority case, but we all have to deal with and is the most scary. And then in addition to that, throughout my section, I'm kind of talking about the heterogeneity that we're seeing out there in the ecosystem and how that impacts how you think about these kind of things. So start with registration. So registration when using a FIDO credential is kind of the most important step because this is where you get all your security traits. The attestation comes during registration. So this is also where you find out, is this a biometric protected key or not? So can you use this as 2FA or is it just 1FA phishing resistant that you'll then also need to step up on top of? So another thing is not all passkeys do send an attestation. For enterprise and high assurance scenarios, we do recommend that you require an attestation before you accept a credential, because otherwise you can't really trust anything it's saying. But do look into that and look at the traits that attestation gives you. And if you're one of those environments that likes to validate each type of authenticator used, do check out the AA GUID. That will tell you which exact YubiKey or which exact sync fabric provider is providing the credential, and so you can filter things down that way. So another thing to keep in mind for registration is order matters. So especially now as we're developing this ecosystem and it's not all there yet, if you configure your desktop first, it's harder to configure your mobile phone. Because kind of going that other direction is a little trickier than phone first, then desktop. And since sync fabrics don't currently go across ecosystem, you have to keep in mind that those are different ecosystems that you'll have to bootstrap across. So keep that in mind. If you're going with a security key approach, security keys do have a limit on the number of discoverable credentials they can support. So keep in mind, typically in an enterprise environment, not a huge deal, but if you're expecting somebody to use their YubiKey against a million different devices, it's not always possible. This one's really important. We have seen people get this wrong several times. The way FIDO works is that the way it's phishing resistant is that it's bound to the domain it's registered on. So the domain you have at your registration step needs to be the same domain as you have at your authentication step. And you better like it, because if you change it, everybody's gonna have to re-enroll. So that is how phishing resistant works, because any different domain could be a phishing domain. And so only that first domain that's registered is the one that will work with the credential. So do keep that in mind. And then revocation. Revocation works differently than passwords. So revocation in the password world is an atomic action. You enter the current one, enter the new one again. 1 dB action. That is not how it works with passkeys. With passkeys, you need to register the new passkey first and then revoke the old one, because otherwise you're just totally locked out and have no credentials. So do keep in mind that this step is different because the authenticator is the one creating that private key, so it has a part to play in this revocation system as well. All right, authentication. So there's a couple different pieces here. Let's start out with cross-device auth. It is a very useful tool. Look into it, figure out how to teach your users about it. It's great for that, the cross-ecosystem discussion I was having before. It's great for bootstrapping across ecosystems. It's great for shared devices. If you have any kiosks in your deployment environment, awesome for that. And then it's really good for devices that don't have great input options, whether it's like a TV or some other scenario like that. Cross-device auth is very helpful. Another is passkeys are not an identity proofing solution. They're just not. You can airdrop passkeys. You can share passkeys within a sync fabric. So do not treat it as an identity proofing solution. Keep that, if you have those scenarios in your workforce, those needs, do that as well. It's not trying to replace those. And then biometrics, be careful with biometrics because people aren't always able to use them. So if you have a biometric key, people cut their thumbs, they wear masks, all these different things. So do have fallbacks. Typically the OS will allow a PIN fallback, but in your policy you should be aware that it's not necessarily an inheritance trait, it could also be a knowledge trait when building your policies. And then leave an escape hatch for if somebody's just not able to do it at all for some reason. And also some passkeys just don't have user verification. They're just a user presence check, and so you need to do a step up on top. So do keep those things in mind. All right, so I said sync fabric a lot. Let's touch real quick on what it is. So a sync fabric, we found when we were building out WebAuthn that the reason it wasn't getting adoption is that you have these device loss scenarios that just leaves you up a creek without a paddle and is an immediate help desk call or an immediate just lockout scenario. And so by breaking these free of the device-bound limitations, the sync fabric really unlocks these new scenarios, and we think will increase the adoption a lot, even in workforce environments. So it solves the whole new device, lost device story for you. So The way that changes things and the way that's impactful is that the keys are no longer hardware bound. Old WebAuthn was all hardware bound, device bound. It was inside a TPM. That is not the case anymore. It's encrypted in some sort of proprietary, encrypted blob, depending on the sync fabric provider, that is then moved around between devices in the cloud. So that does change the security traits. So if you're using syncable passkeys and looking into them, do be aware of that. And then now the sync fabric is the one who owns authorization and recovery of new devices. Your RP or your IDP are no longer involved in that process. So, sorry, moving quickly because I know we're tight on time. So, account recovery. All right, so this is another big change. It used to be that the IDP or RP was the primary person responsible for any account recovery scenarios. You have your email magic link, you have your password recovery strategies, you have your help desk calls, whatever the case may be. With sync fabrics, that's not the case. It's now a shared responsibility because the authenticator owns the private key and the sync fabric owns getting that to new devices. So there's gonna be a little more of a dance that you have to play now. So you need to keep in mind when you're building out this help documentation, when you're building out your user flows, you're like, hey, first go check your sync fabric, go log in there. Maybe you're on an iOS device and before you registered an Android device, go use device like cross-device auth. So you now have to kind of work with this and keep it in mind that you're working with somebody else's flows. It's not purely owned by the RP anymore. And then be robust. People don't understand passkeys yet. This is gonna take all of us to help educate. So educate users that if they delete their key on their local device, that means nothing. It's still in the sync fabric. It's still registered in your server. And vice versa. If you delete it on the server, that passkey is still gonna be on your device and will still be prompted for. So you're gonna have to really educate users around how this key exists in multiple places and how to walk them through these flows. And then passkeys are not a panacea. They don't solve everything. So you do need escape hatches. You just need to keep a really close eye on those recovery patterns because that is where the attackers are gonna move. They're gonna start attacking your help desk. They're gonna start attacking your email magic link recovery flows. So keep a very close eye on that and do be aware of it. And then you will have to educate people across multiple sync fabrics. So this is how it is today. Each of the platform vendors has their own. Typically, in most corporate environments, it's a mixed OS environment. You're not in a single OS stack. And so you're gonna have to worry about these flows where you hop across. So just be aware that that effectively is an account recovery flow and kind of design with that in mind. Cool. So this is an evolving ecosystem. I've mentioned this several times. Things are changing very rapidly. This is all still being standardized this week in these meetings throughout the week. Browsers are still learning and iterating very rapidly. They're in the early stages of designing the flows, so don't lock in your help documentation to a specific implementation because it may change next week as we learn and grow and improve things. Same with the OSs. The OSs, some have passkey provider support, some don't. It's all coming at some point, but it's all still actively being created. And one thing that Fido can't do, Okta can't do, no single company can do is educate users. And so it will take all of you to help us educate. This is kind of a community group effort. So really work with people, educate people, and be sympathetic to people as you do that. So I mentioned a bunch of times that this works here, that works there. This is a great website. It's not owned by Fido, but it's owned, maintained by Fido members. I found it very helpful in looking at what's supported where. Browser OS combinations maybe don't always have the same functionality. So do check out this website as you're looking at these flows and testing these flows because it might just not have been implemented yet in your particular combination of browser OS authenticator. So. That's good. All right. And that's all we have. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So we have about 3 questions online submitted. Question number 1, can we make passkeys the only option with the Okta Identity Engine as the users log in for the first time?
For a new user, we have support for security tokens, but not for any passkey right now. For a brand new user. You can make it your only authentication option during a typical authentication flow for any user, though. So.
Okay, question number 2. Why do you suggest doing mobile before desktop?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Why do you suggest doing mobile before desktop?
Because mobile has a sync fabric today. Desktops typically do not. So it's a little easier for multiple devices. Also, your phone almost always has a camera to scan QR codes to do the cross-device auth, whereas a laptop, it's kind of awkward to do the reverse scan with a desktop environment.
Okay. Next one. Can enterprise restrict the extent at which users can use the sync fabric?
Can enterprises restrict the extent that users can use the sync fabric? That is up to the sync fabrics. I know Apple has released one manner of that. We'll see what the other ones do.
Okay, let's open to the floor. Anyone?
Anybody else in the room? In the back? Want to get her a mic or far back? Yeah.
We can repeat.
Yeah, we can also repeat if we.
I just had a quick question about some of the escape patches that you're talking about earlier, because if it is enforced that FIDO or passkeys is part of the login flow, how do you make sure that users are not getting locked out of their accounts? And then number two, how do you default to some of these escape patches and make sure that this is still like a phishing resistant and still a solid login experience and a safe one?
So, yeah.
No, so one thing I've heard was like how if you have to recover, right? Like the escape patches, what are good ones to make sure it's phishing resistant? What was the first one?
Yeah, that was the first one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a tough one. There are some things getting built out. I think one like that we mentioned that the enterprise are using are really security keys, but the problem is really to make sure that scales. There's individual solutions. There are some authenticators that help with that. But yeah, that is I think where the next big focus will be. Now FIDO is pretty much like the phishing resistant authentication is pretty much there, or like it's very close to being completely supported. But then the next big thing is really to build out the onboarding and recovery.
And also, like, if you do have a non-phishing resistant way to get authenticated or to set up a new factor, you should immediately add alerts when that is used. You know, like trigger an alert, email your security team, be like, hey, take a look at this login, take a look at this user, just to check for things. Because the hope is that that's a severe minority case, so that it's low enough where if it does happen, then you're like, hey, something's up with that, we're gonna manually check this out to make sure it's legit.
The user experience will most likely today not be that great, right? Because the problem is if you let the user do it all themselves, right? Like you're opening up your enterprise or whatever to those attacks where attackers pretty much trick them into recovering their credentials or removing some of the authenticators that they have, so they have to recover. There are some customers, for example, that created manual flows where the end user can never add authenticators or remove authenticators, and they go through a very strict process to allow them, or pretty much where they get upgraded by talking to their IT department to do so. But yeah, the user experience will probably suffer at that point.
Can you elaborate on your point about passkeys is not a solution for identity proofing and how you can airdrop passkeys?
Yeah, so a passkey is a way to authenticate into a user account. It does not validate that you are that person. It's the same as if you share a password today. Like if you're Netflix and you're having a problem with password sharing, you're gonna have the same problem with passkey sharing. So if you, kind of like Johannes was talking about with help desk calls, if you need to be like, I need to make sure this person is the same person using this credential as it was originally issued to, then that's a different problem set. You're gonna have to work in conjunction, just like you do with passwords and MFA today.
Okay, next one online. How does account recovery work in a passkey-only world if the user loses their only logged-in device?
How does account recovery work if they lose their only login device?
Correct.
So that's the hope of the sync fabric. So the sync fabric is designed to solve that exact scenario. So the problem with device-bound passkeys is that if you lose your device, you're up a creek. But with sync fabric, the sync fabric has that encrypted blob stored in the cloud, and new devices, once they authenticate you through whatever manner they so choose, can push down that blob so you're now back in. So the hope is that we can use device-bound credentials and syncable passkeys in conjunction with each other to achieve really good security outcomes.
Anyone else in the room? Okay, I think this is the last question. So is FastPass Okta's equivalent for WebAuthn, and where does it fit in the mix?
Yeah, it's probably not the right forum, but no. So that's like one of the we're working on that. I think the main goal for passkey providers would be that it becomes one and the same. But
yeah, we plan to converge them, the mechanics of how or what we're working on right now. So.
Okay, I think it's a good time for closing remarks.
I think we talked a lot.
No.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We hope you got something out of this. So.